I'm Susan Crawford. I'm a professor here teaching technology policy courses, basically. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this session about artificial intelligence and the practice of law. It's no secret to any one of us that we've entered an age of automation. Machines, especially learning from other machines, are getting better and better at doing many tasks, including tasks involving cognitive-like or cognitive abilities. And the world is changing extremely quickly. Those machines, by the way, aren't being programmed by us in advance. They are learning from observing patterns, patterns on layers of patterns. We know that a large portion of a large number of jobs are going to be maybe not substituted by computers, but certainly supplemented. Not that the robots are going to take my job, but that the robots are going to help me do what I do. So complementary automation may be what happens to perhaps 30% of 60% of jobs. Now, this is a truck bearing down on all professions. And although we think that lawyers are special, and we have great respect for our brains and our facility at pattern matching, it cannot be that we are exceptional. Lawyers have to be part of this story. And because our brains are not very good at taking all of this in, change is happening so rapidly, we thought it would be useful to have some speakers come and talk to us about this particular rate of change. It is exponential, this rate of change. Now, you're thinking, no way, Jose. I went to law school. There's no real risk of this to all the genius and counseling and other kinds of skills that I offer the world. You are not alone if you're thinking not me. A big study just came out from Pew Research this month saying that although 3/4 of Americans believe that artificial intelligence is going to have a major effect on the labor market in the years to come, just 1/3 believe that it's going to have any effect on their job. It's sort of a not my job situation. And in fact, there is a great deal of fear about the involvement of machines in our daily lives. Something like 87% of Americans would prefer to see a human driver in a driverless car, a human driver able to take over the reins at some moment in case of an accident. Almost 60% of Americans never want to be in a driverless car, which is quite something. And 30% of Americans think that more accidents will be caused by driverless cars than by cars with drivers in them. This is flying in the face of a lot of research, but we believe it. We also believe that a human brain should be involved in all job making or job choosing decisions, and that only a few jobs that we're very close to will eventually be taken over by machines. Now, on last night, the dean said that he's delighted to see so many first years in the library on Saturday nights with the lights on. It was quite a moment. And there was a lot of memory of law school across that panel. There are grand implications of all of these facts for the future of law school, for the future of law firms. If more and more of law doctrine learning can be accomplished by a machine, let's say 10,000 lifetimes in an instant, all those patterns recognized by a machine, what happens to the kind of education we're carrying out in law school, which at least in the first year is heavily doctrinal and heavily based on memorization? So now that you're feeling all cheered up, to help our brains take on, again, the implication of all this, particularly for law firms and in-house counsel, I am so delighted to introduce to you our two speakers today who are very generously coming to ruminate with us about this. First, Ed Felten is the Kahn Professor of Computer Science and Public Affairs at Princeton and the founding director of Princeton's Center for Information Technology Policy. And in 2004, Scientific American magazine named him to its list of 50 worldwide science and technology leaders. Ed Felten was the very first chief technology officer of the Federal Trade Commission between 2011 and 2012. He writes widely about technology, and I asked him here because he is a wonderful translator of complex mathematical and computer science topics for ordinary audiences. And those ordinary audiences often include Congress. So Ed Felten is very gifted at explaining things to representatives. He's published 80 papers, 2 books, and he's the right person to talk to us about this today. Stasia Kelly, to his left, is also the right person to talk to us about this today. I intersected with Stasia when we were both at Wilmer Cutler Pickering, now Wilmer Hale, in Washington, D.C. She has gone on to glory from that law firm, having served as general counsel and as an executive in charge of corporate governance and compliance at 4 public companies, beginning with Fannie Mae, then Sears Roebuck, then MCI WorldCom before its merger with Verizon, and most recently at AIG, where she was responsible for compliance and served as general counsel there, and as the vice chairman of the American International Group. She is now the co-managing partner for the Americas for DLA Piper. And you have to say for the Americas because there are 4,200 lawyers at DLA Piper, one of the world's largest law firms. She combines this huge range of leadership skills and credentials with a warm humanity that is going to help us, again, understand how humans will intersect with this new world. I've asked Ed to start off talking to us about trends and the landscape for artificial intelligence and what we might expect in the years to come.
All right, so let's talk about what's happening in artificial intelligence and machine learning now. There's been a huge surge of progress in the field over the last 8 years or so. And I'm going to talk in a minute about what that was, what are some of the changes that have happened, and why it has been surprising, even to experts, how fast this field has progressed. But first, I need to give you a caveat. And the caveat is that generally in computer science, it takes 10 to 20 years for an idea to move from being proven feasible in the lab to being widely deployed in products that people use all the time. And so when I talk about progress that has happened in the lab over the last 8 years, we need to recognize that most of this has yet to arrive in the market, has yet to influence the products that we use every day, whether in our everyday lives or in legal practice. So I will stipulate that many of the AI-based products that are available to lawyers today may not be the most helpful for all purposes. But nonetheless, really most of the wave of progress that people are excited about now has yet to arrive. OK, so let me talk about what that wave is. If you had gathered a set of AI experts in a place like this, say 15 years ago, they would have made a list of capabilities that were far off, that it would be that seemed distinctively human, and it would be a long time, decades at least, before computers would be able to do them. And this includes things like understanding the nuances of human language, as exemplified by a task like translating text from one language to another, and doing it with capturing the full nuance and the idiomatic and aspects of style that a really good human translator can do. Well, guess what? Computers can do that now. They can do that at a level that is roughly equivalent to a skilled human translator, and they can translate between languages which they have never seen together. That is, if a computer model that has seen English and French text together and has seen French and Bulgarian text together, for example, can translate from English to idiomatic Bulgarian about as well as a person could. That was a big surprise. In situations involving reasoning and decision-making in unstructured situations, especially unstructured safety-critical situations, we would have said that was far away. We would not be at a point where we would be willing to trust computers to do that. And driving a car in a place like Boston would be a good example of an unstructured safety-critical situation that requires decision-making. And again, that would have been seen as decades away, and now it's feasible. Already today, computers are probably a better driver than you or I in a setting like that. And it's only a matter of the legal system and society getting comfortable with that fact that is keeping them off the roads right now. So another surprising step forward, and computers being able to do something that we thought was distinctively human. Situations involving bargaining and negotiation, involving deception, for example, the ability to read and react to an opponent or adversary in that situation. Also, we would have thought that was something that only people could do. The exemplar problem there is poker, playing heads up, no limit, hold'em poker. Guess what? Computers are better than people at that, too. Again, that came as a surprise. And I could go on. There's a whole set of other capabilities that we would have, things involving long-term strategic thinking, the ability to recognize faces, the ability to see a picture of a face, recognize who it is, and recognize the emotions that that person is experiencing. That is also something that computers can do arguably better than people. And so there are a lot of things that we would have thought were uniquely human that have fallen. And those are things, those capabilities have not yet begun to really fully affect the market. And so we see big changes coming. But the other piece of this is that notional panel of computer scientists up here 15 years ago would have said a lot of things that were wrong in their forecasting. And so when we forecast 15 years forward, we need to bear in mind that, that our ability to forecast may not be as accurate as we would like. AI has shown very steady progress, some acceleration, some deceleration, over the past 50, 60, 70 years. And so we know that progress will continue. We know what's already possible. But we should have some humility, I think, when we say that a particular cognitive capability is uniquely human, because such claims have proven to be right often in the short run, but wrong in the long run.
Thanks, Ed. I've asked Stasia to talk to us about what DLA Piper is doing at the moment.
Great. And if I can, I'm going to start with a little bit of a backdrop, because I have the daunting task of trying to figure out how AI and the tools that are currently available to lawyers get implemented in a law firm the size of ours, or whatever size of law firm. But there's a backdrop here that I think is important to think about, because what Ed's talking about is almost the perfect storm coming to the law firms in a competitive backdrop. So what I mean by that is, since the financial crisis, there has been basically a drop-off in legal work. There's no growth in the legal market in the world. So law firms are looking at the same size pie and trying to compete for a bigger piece of that pie. There are in-house lawyers, and I look to one of my former in-house colleagues, who now have actually the leverage as a client that the outside law firms used to have. Right? Now, when I was in-house as a general counsel, I didn't have any of that leverage. And of course, I had to wait till I was gone and then back at a law firm before the leverage shifted. But nevertheless, it is very true. So clients now have, and as they should, in my opinion, they now have the upper hand in what they want to see from their law firms, how they want to see it, meaning the cheapest, most efficient vehicle of delivery possible, yet they want to maintain the relationships and, in fact, really become more of a partner with their outside counsel than just a vendor relationship. Then you add to that the fact that law firms, very different from when we were at Wilmer Cutler and Pickering, now Wilmer Hale, are businesses. They're not the partnerships of old. I miss that sometimes. My clients don't miss it at all. You know, there were times when you would pay for partners to get together in the office and just ruminate about an issue, and somebody would pay for that. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. And again, I think that's a good evolutionary step. But what does it mean? It means that law firms have to figure out that not only are they businesses, they have to succeed as businesses. Our clients want us to act like they do. So they have no patience for law firms who don't get the fact that they are in the business of law. Then you add to that, what does that mean for the law students in the room, the associates coming up the ranks? No longer is this a 7-year up or out sort of journey through a law firm. It is oh my goodness, am I going to be here for 12 years and then maybe not make partner? I think I'll kill myself if I actually have to do that. So while that has caused a lot of angst in the ranks of students, I'm here to say that it's also a great opportunity. it is a terrific opportunity to look at a career in the law as a career that has a lot of paths. So that's the backdrop in which all of this artificial intelligence and these tools are coming into a law firm setting and being available for lawyers. Then add to that the fact that, thank goodness, there's a 10 to 15 year runway here, because lawyers are not necessarily the quickest to adopt change and the quickest to take risks when it comes to new things happening to them. But there's one thing we are all really good at, and that's being competitive. So, right, if we're not going to, if there's going to be a firm out there doing this, it's going to, DLA Piper is going to be at the forefront. And oh, by the way, as one of the biggest law firms in the world, we should be ahead of this curve. We should be shaping how AI is going to be used. We should be out there being in the forefront of understanding what the risks are, what the applications are, and then helping our lawyers do this, and then helping our clients. Because, by the way, AI is not just being used in law firms. It's being used by the clients. In fact, probably the most powerful use is an artificial intelligence tool that JP Morgan Chase has developed called Coin, which takes their massive amount of data, unstructured data in their contracts, their derivative instruments, their CDS, all of the things that, oh, by the way, ended up not being very useful during the financial crisis, where I was unfortunately at the center of. But being able to take that and seeing the nuances of the documentation. So query, in 2004, had we had artificial intelligence tool or a predictive tool that would have shown the mortgage banking CDS world what the provisions of some of these contracts and instruments what could happen when the markets froze or the margin calls happened, there was no reference pricing, and all of a sudden things would freeze. Query whether that could have not have been predictive, but could have been preventative. I mean, hindsight's 20/20. But to me, that's incredibly potentially powerful stuff that law firms should embrace, law students, young associates should embrace, because it's these kind of thinking, the kind of minds that can take these ideas and figure out the applications that can help the law firm and the clients do what they want to do and be better and prevent what might be bad situations. That's perfectly right in the sweet spot of law firms like us.
Ed, I want to push you slightly on the framework for this discussion, just so we get our building blocks straight. In December 2016, the New York Times Magazine ran a giant article about the development of Google Translate, and in particular, a huge jump in ability that Google Translate suddenly experienced when Google threw a lot more materials at it. And the CEO is quoted in the article as saying, Google is AI now. This is what we're doing. You've said 10 to 15 years is the time horizon for this audience.
Yeah.
Could it be that things are speeding up? That seemed to happen in about 9 months.
So that was a big improvement.
Yeah.
That, part of the difficulty here is in how you measure this, because that step forward was the application of ideas that were developed elsewhere earlier, and putting ideas together. And this is the kind of process of recombination of ideas and experimentation and development of sort of a product pipeline that causes these things to take as long as it does. There were a bunch of the key enablers of steps like that go back to the early 2000s. And as well, when that article came out, the capabilities that were being discussed were still in Google's lab, pretty close to being rolled out into practice. But yeah, certainly some things will come to market faster. But really, the development tends to be cumulative over time. But if you look at big ideas like the internet, for example, or the sort of database technologies that make e-commerce possible, those tend to be on a longer time frame. And probably most types of products we use that will be transformed by the recent AI revolution haven't been transformed yet.
And Stasia, more on the background also, at DLA Piper, you're already using at least one tool you told us about. And
Right.
what is that?
Kira is it's a tool that's used for M&A transactions to examine the most successful clauses that have been used in M&A transactions and recognizing them. And then, of course, once you load those clauses into the system, then you don't have to retrain the machine the next time you use it. It takes that and then gives it back to you and whether it's been successful in the last 15 transactions. So, I mean, in that respect, a little bit like e-discovery. I mean, it's been an evolution, and I do think it's on the verge of an explosion. But right now, it's sort of been an evolution. Lawyers are used to dealing with massive amounts of data. What's different here, I think, for us, or for me looking at this as a non-AI person, is the predictive capabilities for clients, the ability to take things and predict what's going to work and what's not going to work. So Kira is a big one. There's one that was just actually announced this morning by a European law firm that's a knowledge management of federal legislative and regulatory landscapes. But what the difference, I mean, everybody has software that can help you navigate legislation and regulation. The difference here is that there's a predictive ability of this tool to tell you which pieces of legislation, are more likely to be passed by the House, which by the Senate, and which are most likely to be enacted, which of course then maybe gives you the ability to zero in your lobbying or regulatory or legislative efforts to certain things that are more likely to take place than others. That might not work so good with tax reform right now. I'm not sure how that would work. But it is that kind of, I think, predictive piece of it that would be very helpful to a law firm.
And this is a good example of one of the general ways in which AI may change the nature of this work, is that AI can allow you to do work of higher quality by being better able to spot opportunities. It may allow you to eliminate mistakes. Some of the most exciting, to me, work that's going on in AI is happening in the medical field around being able to spot when a medical professional is likely making an error that may harm a patient. And to be able to do that quickly and tap the person on the shoulder and say, hey, wait a minute, aren't you forgetting? Or shouldn't you? Or have you checked this thing? And so the ability to avoid mistakes, to have that assistant that can look over your shoulder and in a really smart way warn you when you might be making a mistake. And do that in a way that's not super annoying because it's always wrong. And both of these sorts of capabilities, the ability to do higher quality work, the ability to avoid mistakes, tends to move you toward producing work and producing artifacts that are more complex than what you did before. So the complexity of the work increases, and you use the technology to help you manage that without error.
If I can just pick up on that, too, there's one other piece of it, and this really isn't a formalized tool yet, but you can see it coming. So restructuring lawyers, big restructuring practices. Obviously, clients would prefer to know when they're about to head down a road that might end up in bankruptcy long before they get there so that they can restructure and actually do this in a very seamless way that's great for shareholders. So what if you had, and they're there, you had a group of algorithms, you had some very smart Wall Street analysts who take all the data that they possibly can unstructured, put it together and look at it and say, you know, that this company is very likely in 12 months to be having a problem here. And you're the lawyer, and this is your client, and you look at this, and you take that information, and you go to the general counsel, or the CEO, hopefully you go to the general counsel, and you say, here's some things that you ought to take a look at. What do you do with that? I mean, that could be an enormously powerful tool, although, frankly, human nature now is going to get in the way because most GCs would say, yeah, thanks a lot, but we're just doing fine.
Different.
We're different. We're not going to, there's not going to be any crisis. But if you can get through all of that, and there is really a predictive piece of that, then what a wonderful tool that would be. How you prove its effectiveness because you've prevented it from happening, I don't know. I'd leave that up to you to be able to figure that out. But I think tools like that would be just enormously effective and powerful for clients.
I also want to push on the segmenting the legal market a bit, because that's a pretty high-flying decision. The risk of collapse and the counseling that goes into that sounds like very high-level patent recognition. But there's a lot of other tasks in the practice of law. Let's try to build up the basics here. form contract negotiation, document review we've already mentioned, maybe even small claims advice, doing all of that. What other things can we imagine would be more quickly taken over by automation than the kinds of decision-making you're describing, Stasia?
Well, I think one thing that may happen is that the parts of practice that are most routine and repetitive, perhaps less challenging for an experienced lawyer, will increasingly be either done or assisted by automated systems. What are the changes that would need to happen for people to rely entirely on an automated system for certain kinds of legal advice? That's beyond me. I'm an imposter here, not being a lawyer. But that will be possible as a technological matter. You'll be able to give people who are not able to afford much legal representation, much better representation by using automated means. Whether the investment is in place to fund the development of those technologies is a different question, but it will be possible as a technological matter to provide sort of routine kinds of legal support for people in a more automated way, and that may drive down the cost of that kind of legal service to the benefit of clients, especially clients with less ability to pay. And so I think you will see some things coming up from the bottom, if you will, as well as some very high-flying things happening at the top.
Right. And while you'll have young associates who are not going to be burning the midnight oil on a Saturday night reviewing documents, but they may be looking at what came out of that review, putting them together and making meaningful interpretations that then turn into recommendations for a client in a way that they wouldn't have done for 3 more years. So they don't have to slog through those steps in order to get to that point.
The question, though, getting back to your talk about the model of the law firm where the youngest associates now maybe can't be paid for or won't be paid for by clients, how do you then move associates up through law firms if they aren't paid for? How does that work?
Well, that's a burning question. I mean, I could spend hours talking about the changing model of the law firm, because the more pressure clients put on the economics of the representation and the delivery of service, obviously, the less likely you're going to get Clorox to pay for the $180,000 first-year associate that we just hired. So what's happening is, in order to get the delivery model, we've got a whole different set of analytical folks who literally sit there and figure out how do we put a team together for a client's project that is going to be what the client wants to see in the cost area, but we're not going to lose our shirts. There's going to be some margins here. So what's happened already is that first-year associates will always have associates. That's the good news. But there are also alternative lawyering vehicles. There's the contract attorneys of counsel, temporary placement. All you have to do is pick up the paper and see a new temporary placement secondment group. Again, I think that's all can be an opportunity. It can be a positive, because not every associate wants to come and work 12 years at a law firm and maybe or not make partner. They want to use this as a learning. That then presents another challenge for law firms. How do you keep enough associates or enough lawyers that you want to have stay and have that institutional knowledge and go forward and become the partners of tomorrow? Because unfortunately, we're not all going to live forever, and none of us will. And so we got to have that ability. That is right now an incredibly challenging part of the business for law firms and for young lawyers. And figuring out what their career paths are going to be, in my view, law firms owe it to the associates and the contract lawyers that they're bringing in to provide them the vision and the visibility and the opportunity to figure out what those career paths mean, even if that means helping them leave the law firm and go someplace else that provides them with more opportunity and maybe even turns them into a client someday. So all of those conversations are taking place in law firms, and now the artificial intelligence is on top of that, right? And that's pushing that.
So Ed, can we take refuge in complementarity? That a lawyer would always do better having an AI assistant by his or her side, just as a customer service rep needs a screen with lots of information coming towards it, or is complementarity ultimately overtaken by substitutability?
No, I think, I mean, complementarity is all we have, right? Machines are gaining on us. So complementarity is how we need to be thinking. The question is how to find a way of structuring our work so that we really are a valuable part of that complementary team. That is how we can team with these systems. There are some functions where they will just be sufficiently better than us that it doesn't make sense for us to be doing those things anymore at all. But there will continue to be things that either where a person is a computer-human team is valuable, more valuable than a computer alone would be, or cases where what the client really wants is to have a person doing a job. There's an interesting story here, actually, as a digression about chess-playing computers, which I think sheds some light on this. And that is that back around 2000, was the first time that a computer was able to beat the world chess champion in chess. And sometime after that, a series of studies were done to look at whether people to look at computer-human teaming. And a set of chess tournaments were held in which some of the competitors were people, some were machines, and some were teams of people and machines. And what you found is during that period that the teams won. And that, in fact, a second-rate computer teaming with a second-rate person could beat a first-rate computer or a first-rate person. And the reason was that although both brought something to the table, they were complementary in their strengths and weaknesses. AI people always debate whether intelligence is the right word to describe what these machines are able to do. From a terminology standpoint, that ship has already sailed. But there is a sense in which if machines are intelligent, it's an alien kind of intelligence that's different from ours. And that means that teaming gives a real advantage. And so it was conventional wisdom that computer plus human beats computer, even if the computer alone is stronger. But that eventually stopped being true for chess, where the computers were so much better by themselves that a human teammate could only foul things up and stop providing value.
As with cars, perhaps.
Yeah.
As with cars, we will get to that point where it would be irresponsible. It would be as irresponsible to drive a car yourself on the streets as it is to drive drunk today. Because the safety difference between a sober person and a drunk person now will be like the safety difference between a machine and a sober person in the future.
Now,
so we'll reach that point. For those tasks, for other tasks, probably teaming will continue to be valuable.
And from a law firm practice standpoint, relationships will always make a difference in the practice of law, I believe, with clients, right? And you can't have your machine take you out for a round of golf, and you can't go to dinner, and you can't have a back and forth with someone, which I still believe is going to be a foundational part of practicing law.
Now, Stasia, in getting ready for this complementarity discussion, I talked to two other managing partners of law firms. And they said, oh, that's so interesting. We're really worried about it. And we formed a committee, but no one's talking about it. And we don't know what to do. So how should a law firm not just respond to this set of alarm bells, but actually get ahead of it? What is the plan? What happens?
Yeah, so, and it's really it's just in its basic stages. So Altman Weil just did a study of, I think, close to 400 law firms asking this question about artificial intelligence. Not surprisingly, the very large law firms, most of them knew that artificial intelligence existed and that there were a couple of tools. And of those, maybe 50% were either doing something or thinking of doing something, including the committees that they were forming. The smaller firms, almost 90% of them, were not even aware of developments literally in the area. And when you think about it, some of this, and again, this goes to the competitive landscape of law firms, the smaller the firms, particularly in niche practices like the immigration law or tax, a lot of the partners in those small firms end up spending a lot of their time on administrative tasks. These are the tasks that they could absolutely turn over to a machine learning, AI predictive piece, even without the predictive piece. So you'd think that they would be at the forefront. So there's that whole, We got to start talking about it more. It's not just about knowledge management, it's knowledge mining, and this is what law firms need to be looking at. I think once, as I said before, the competitive piece of it really jumps out and law firms see that they will have a competitive competitive advantage, and it will be that competitive advantage that will differentiate them enough to be the one that a client wants to use and partner with, that you really start seeing, you'll start seeing a faster and faster adoption and early adoption. But again, lawyers are really, we don't change all that. We don't take to change that well or that
right.
risk, right?
And in fact, it seems to take crisis plus leadership
Right.
to get big institutions like law firms or law schools to change what they do. And this may seem counterintuitive, but Ed, I'm going to ask you, there are a lot of law students in this audience. What would you advise them to be learning?
Well, let's see. So I have a standard rant, which I'm happy to deliver right now, about the importance of learning about technology, which is not really about learning the hands-on skills of coding, although I think that's very important, in service of understanding how to think about technology, having good instincts for what it will and won't be able to do, understanding the role that it will play in your work and in the work of everyone you're dealing with. I think that is a part of it, to learn about these phenomena and to get not necessarily advanced expertise, but to be familiar and be able to understand what it's going to do and know how to talk to people who are more deeply versed in it than you are. That's part of it. Another part of it is, I'd say, is to try to understand and focus on those aspects of the work where having a person do that aspect is a big part of the value. So this is the, you might say golfing with clients, but of course there's much more to it than that. People often will want people will want advice, they'll want someone to sympathize with them, and they'll want to be able to talk something through with a person in a lot of settings. And there are a lot of areas other than law where that's the case, where a big part of the product is the fact that the product is delivered by a person. And so I'd say looking toward those is important. And then the last piece of advice would be to prepare for a workplace with a greater rate of change than what your parents experienced. What you do, what you will have to do, where you go is likely to change more often. And so to be prepared to be agile and to try to be broadly educated so that you're able to adapt to the things that happen, because perhaps more things will happen to you than happened to a previous generation of lawyers.
All right, and that also means young lawyers really need the ability to take risk, to recognize risk and to take it in their careers. That's a big part of all of the changing dynamics within the practice of law. And again, to me, that's a positive, not a negative.
And speaking of positive, you sit on the pro bono committee for DLA Piper, and Ed mentioned this briefly, that there may be great opportunities stemming from AI to provide very quick legal services for people who otherwise can't afford them. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually a group in Washington that we've helped seed, which is basically delivery of legal services by lawyers like lawyers at DLA or other major firms, but basically it's geared towards mid-market and lower socioeconomic, where they can't afford to do it. So the more efficient and the easier it is to deliver services, and because a lot of this is repetitive too, it's the immigration, it's the domestic violence, it's the adoption, it's all of the things that you want to be able to provide people with services so you can use fewer people and be able to scale that kind of delivery across more people. That's a great example of where this could be very beneficial. Let alone third world countries where you could actually get, we do a lot of training in African countries for young lawyers. So being able to take that training and do some of it remotely would also be incredibly valuable.
So lots of notes of optimism here. One of the top job categories in America is driver. It's the top category in 25 states or something, a huge number of jobs in that area.
Yeah, it's about a 1.5% of the workforce.
Yeah, and so there's a workforce that is deeply threatened by autonomous vehicles, obviously. And yet here we are trying to be optimistic about lawyers. So Ed, I'm going to nudge you. Isn't it the case that there will be fewer jobs for human lawyers in the years to come?
I think that probably is true. I think there'll be fewer jobs for human lawyers, and the human lawyers will be providing more value per capita. That's what tends to happen when automation comes into a sector. You have fewer people working in it, but more value gets produced. And I think that's likely to be the case among lawyers. If you're a Harvard Law School student, you're probably in a better position to be in that world than maybe some others. But I think that is inevitable, and that has been the historic pattern.
So we planned this session, or rather, I got excited about it because of the alarm bells that it does ring for legal education, for law firms, for the profession as a whole. This sense of immediacy, of urgency, of need to understand your AI partners, need to plan your own career and your own way of learning to get ready for that, struck me as extremely important for us to discuss. I want to thank Ryan Giarrusso, who's right there, who's a 1L, who did his college work in machine learning and understands the Google Translate engine. So there are many people like Ryan around in law school, and we want to celebrate them and help them along in their careers. But I also point to Ryan because there are a lot of students out here, and I bet you have a lot of questions. And I want to turn now to a question time of this discussion.